Hi folks, you're with Tash today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about really an extension of social trust and the consequences of forced mass immigration that the globalists are forcing onto the Western countries without the consent of the government. Now, once social trust breaks down, then sort of along the stream there's the business trust in a business dealing, trust in contracts, the contract that the work you're contracting to do, or the agreement between parties, and it can be to do certain work or distribute goods or services or something like that. So now, there's been a huge decline. Now, the decline in a business trust comes from two areas. One is you've had this massive influx of people from low trust societies, and the West, on a relative basis, places like Australia has had, again, on a relative basis, extremely high trust compared to most other countries in the world, particularly poorer countries, where there's, on a relative basis, very little trust or almost no trust. The only trust you can have is in your family members. Anyone outside of that is to be treated with varying degrees of mistrust and distrust. So, and on the other side is the social division that's being fostered, created, generously funded in conflict between just genders, for example, and the cultural history of the West. So all straight white males, particularly older ones, are viewed as being Nazi oppressors, and that young people, particularly young girls, are taught this from high school and through college and through all the NGO groups that they're associated with. And remember, high school now in the West has effectively become a recruiting ground for NGO activists under the very noses of the education departments that are, again, globalist controlled. So they're encouraging young people, particularly girls, but and boys that are maybe gay or something like that, but encouraging as many people to go into NGO activism. So if you go running around waving placards about climate change, you're not just talking about the climate and that sort of thing. You're actually fighting Nazis, because that's what straight white males over the age of 45 are. Maybe not all of them, but nearly all of them are Nazis, and you're fighting back against them, fighting back against the man. And they've been schooled and have had this drilled into them, and that the entire white history, cultural history of the West is just one long fascist Nazi story. And so they're eradicating that and fighting back against it, again, particularly the young girls. Now, they're getting this in high school, certainly in university, and also through the NGOs. And talking to some of these young girls, or young women, as they've maybe left high school already, and they're completely caught up in the emotional symbolism and I'm fighting back, I'm fighting Nazis, I'm so brave, I'm so edgy, and I'm so out there, and this sort of thing. And then you got these very low IQ, simple girls, but they've got this attitude, but they're now being spread, and have been for some years. They're spread around, due to affirmative action and these sorts of things, and gender quotas. They're spread around, nearly all the corporates, the HR departments, diversity and inclusion departments, and so on. So they're and they see their job isn't turning up to do good human resource administration. Their job is there to fight Nazis. And so this is also skewing very much business negotiations, doing work, entering into any sort of contract, because the wording in the contract is being reinterpreted by these ideological social justice low IQ warriors that think that if myself being a straight white male over the age of 45, and having probably the last tranche of kids coming through in any sort of a merit-based education system, that we're all Nazis, and you have to prove that you're not. And so it's now, I wouldn't call it commonplace, but it seems increasingly to be becoming so that we're having to, if we do a contract at work, we're having to be sort of ideologically approved of, if not sanitized by some activists who've never had a job, who've never had responsibility, who've never had to do anything or be accountable, and yet they're the ones sort of fighting the social justice and fighting back against the Nazis. So you've got the contract, business contracts on two sides. One is the declining trust due to the massive racial changes that occurred in the West, and the culture, as in outside cultural changes or outside cultures coming in causing changes. And on the other side, internally, young white women who are convinced that they're fighting back against all these Nazis and putting them in their place. Something you can see in a lot of TV programs. I recently saw a cop show where the young girl in the police department, she's a cadet, but she is way smarter than any of those damn straight white males. They're all bumbling fools compared to her. She's not only much better at the policing than they are, but she manages every few minutes in the script to give all these older white men moral lectures about their evilness. And when a criminal gets caught for people trafficking, people smuggling or something like that, then it's the female cop pushes the straight white males aside and gets these people smugglers who are clearly depicted as violent criminals, but that doesn't put her off. She sits them down, she gives them a good finger wagging. Do you realize these girls are underage? And do you realize that these girls will be forced to have sex with men? Do you understand that, you damn fascist? Now, so wonderful moral lectures. Huh? You can just tell the IQ of the scriptwriters. and then when it comes to big punch-ups with these 250-pound muscled-up baddies, they beat the shit out of the big burly cops with years of experience and that sort of thing. But I tell you what, when that little 5'2", 100-pound, 8 stone, 50-kilogram cadet police chick comes around, she kicks the shit out of those bad guys and disarms them, karate chops them, even though she can't do karate, and just beats the crap out of them and doesn't even break a sweat, while all the straight white males just falling around, straight white male cops there just falling around. So these girls that these young women have got an interesting view of what reality is. But this is also part of the assault on business. So I'll talk a little bit about this. When I first started traveling on business, I mentioned this in other videos. I naively assumed as a kid, a young man, I naively assumed that the social trust and business trust in Australia was that was just how it was in the whole world. I didn't think that. I just thought, well, that must be how it is, and at least I was open to alternative points of view and different ways of doing things, and even then I was something of a serious history buff. So anyway, as I was going to other countries, if it was first world countries, say in the United States, for example, there was relatively high social trust, but it was a group preference social trust. So the people from Scandinavian extraction in Minneapolis trusted each other, for example, trusted each other. The people of British sort of descent somewhere else trusted. So there's multiple in-groups. I wouldn't call these groups competing necessarily. They still viewed themselves as Americans, but their higher levels of trust were still to their in-group. And it didn't mean necessarily they distrusted others. There was just a lower degree of trust, and there would be a need for a sort of maybe more extended negotiations and a more tightly worded contract, that sort of thing. I found that in New York, for example, particularly the Jewish business people, they kind of didn't even trust anybody, and they were quite brutal. I was quite shocked when I first went there, because the way they sort of spoke to me is, if you've come here to screw us, you've come here to fuck us. We know that. We don't need evidence. We don't need proof. That's just how it is. But we're going to fuck you first, and don't you dare take us on, or you lose, and this sort of thing. So I thought how terribly insecure, even as a young man, I thought how terribly insecure that is. This assumption everyone's trying to do you evil or do you in, must be very difficult to live with that sort of paranoia. I mean, how does it affect your digestion? You wouldn't want a high fat diet when and that sort of thing. So it was a different. Now, say in Britain, social trust was high, but apathy was probably as bigger issue as navigating trust. Around Europe, I suppose it differed. I found social trust, say in Germany as an example, quite high. Little bit of paranoia there, the outsider trying to screw them. There was a bit of that, but otherwise it was not too bad. This is Western Germany at the time I first went to. France, the arrogance, the social trust was reasonably good, but the view of outsiders as being irrelevant was probably as bigger issue as any trust may have been. But look, just going around, I found social trust was pretty high. Not much social trust in South America. The elites at the very apex in South America, I found they were, typically of European extraction, and they were sartorially splendid to the nth degree. These guys, they were immaculately presented and very sharp suits and this sort of stuff. This is at the elite level. The people at the next level down weren't, and they were not very, more suspicious, more from what they didn't understand or couldn't relate to, rather than paranoia per se. But again, and around the poorer countries, the social trust ranged from sort of very low to almost zero. Even in places like Hong Kong, where they'd been British colonies for nearly 100 years, and yet I found the social trust quite low there, which I thought was interesting. The belief that now there was two things running in parallel here. There was low social trust, also the belief in places like India, also Hong Kong and around the Chinese diaspora and elsewhere, this belief that you didn't create wealth, that there was this, and I've mentioned this before, this fixed pot of wealth, and the only way you could get more is by taking it from someone else. The way you could take from someone else is by deceiving them and tricking them, outwitting them, and this was very much seen as how you got rich. So the Indians were diabolical in this regard, where they thought it was a battle of wits, who could outwit who, and if that involved lies, treachery, trickery, misrepresentations, who the fuck cared? It was who won in the end and who outwitted who out of the money that they had. And try as you might, it's very hard to change people's attitudes, because they think that way. They assume that you think that way. And the Americans that come to these third world countries trying to buy up market share by throwing money in all directions, they were just seen as useless, silly, naive saps. And you even see it today with Russians and those sort of people coming to the West or coming to Australia. They misinterpret high levels of social trust as being almost childlike naivety. And you can sit down and talk to Russians or recent arrivals from not just Russia, East Europe generally, and they just see high trust to them is a bunch of children running around almost asking to be exploited, and that's how they perceive high trust. And you try and explain to them that high social trust is desirable a number of reasons, because once you start screwing people and then they want to screw you back, social trust disappears, and the amount of wealth that's destroyed by people hesitating over or not doing business deals or trying to screw the other guy. And there's the counter attack comes, this sort of thing. That vast sums of wealth in any society are lost by that attitude, but they don't see it that way. Well, hey, hold on a minute. If I can get a bit more in my pocket from the other guy, hey, I'm the smart one. And if they've got less wealth, hey, who cares? You try and say, well, no. If you have more wealth and they have more wealth, then isn't that a good thing? Well, no, I want to get more of the wealth that they have more. It's that ridiculous. They've got no concept. So anyway, how does this manifest in the West, or in this case, Australia? This reduced social trust and hence business trust. Well, it means that business deals aren't getting done that could be done. Innovation, invention, and these sorts of things that could be done are not getting done. But it also particularly manifests in cronyism, insofar as people are less and less inclined to do business outside of their immediate circle. And this is a number of areas. The globalists, for example, will only funnel wealth to organisations that further the globalist project, for example. So if you're a labour hire organisation that runs endless amount of scams to bring in illiterate peasants, effectively illegally, but bring out masses of illiterate brown and black peasants to the West, then you're performing a service for globalisation, and they will reward you for that. Or whether it's media shills, telling the most outrageous lies to the public to try and say to the public that the destruction of their society is somehow a good thing, and so on. The lies that the media sort of pushes, then those media companies that commercially could not exist, by the way, those media companies are then also richly rewarded by the globalist machine. The vast array of NGOs that do business with each other on the basis of ideological sort of similarity and common source of funding and so on. So my experience is with business contracts that whereas it was not difficult to sit down and write a contract 20 years ago, or do business with someone, and that whether it was through a handshake, exchange of letters, or indeed a detailed contract, it wasn't hard to do that. There was a lot of that around, but today there's much less of it around, and people are far more reluctant to engage in. Or alternatively, and this is where I think the biggest loss of trust is, that many organisations now will engage the services of another organisation, which could be supply of goods or services, will engage another organisation on the basis of some sort of vague, undefined trial period. So there's no specific purchase order. We want 100 widgets of X. There isn't that. It's supply of widgets, price to be discussed, period of supply undetermined. So because of that, say in the case of my business, I'm not prepared to put substantial resources into something if the other side can arbitrarily withdraw without reason or cause at any time. So what they want, I'm using this just as a generic explanation. What the customer or the client wants is for the supplying organisation is to put all their resources on the table available, and the client or the customer is only going to access us for as long as it suits them. At any tick of the clock, they want to be able to pull the plug without liability or anything like that. Now, in my case, and in every case, I'm not prepared to put that many resources on the table because it's expensive to do it. And if they pull out arbitrarily at any time, then I still have to meet the costs I've incurred. So economically, it's simply not viable for me. I'm simplifying it a bit here, but economically, it's not viable for me to do it. But they don't want to commit to any contractual obligation to do a certain time or take a certain amount of delivery, pay a certain amount or anything like that. So in return, I then have to adjust how I do business. I'd say, okay, well, if you're not prepared to commit, here's a contract. Okay, you don't want to sign the contract. Okay, if you're not prepared to commit, then I'm only prepared to put a certain amount of resources in there. Oh, but we want you to put all your resources on the table because that's where well, sure, then you sign this contract, or you're obliged in some way to pay out the certain term of the contract. No, we don't want any obligation. We don't want to be under any obligation at all, but we want you to be obligated to us. Now that is where the trust has already disappeared. They want to be able to exit the arrangement anytime if it suits them. You know, our business needs have changed or something. But if your business needs change, it doesn't mean you have to sort of spin out of an arrangement in 5 minutes or 1 day or something. You know, you can have a sort of a changeover period where everyone meets their obligations of supply and payments and those sorts of things. But that's not happening anymore, or certainly far less than it used to happen. And again, this is causing a trust thing. I'm again using this generically, and I'm simplifying it quite a bit, but I don't trust them to pay me, or that they'll wriggle out at any time because they're refusing to be obligated, and they're nervous. And it's not so much a two-way trust thing. They're nervous because they can't con me into being fully obliged to them without them being obliged to me. That type of scenario. Now, on top of that, because the wording, assuming there's any agreement at all, is so vague, you can have various things like some snot-nosed little bimbo, low IQ bimbo, and the diversity inclusion department can say, we suspect that Billy Bob read Shakespeare and therefore he must be a Nazi, and therefore we don't support Nazis, so we don't have to do business with them, or we can get rid of them and get someone else, that sort of stuff. And so we're not prepared. Certainly I'm not prepared to tolerate that. And put up with arbitrary sort of vague and arbitrary measures like that. So this again is seen, well, that means the client thinks, well, you're untrustworthy then, because you won't be fully obliged to us, so therefore we can't trust what you might do, and so on. So but in the midst of all this, and the point I'm making is trust just diminishes on both sides, and the customer will complain, or the client, corporate will complain, well, we can't find any organization to deliver these services to us. What a terrible situation we're in. There's just no standard of service out there. And they'll complain along the lines of, there's no one willing to go along with our outrageous terms and conditions. Now, the end result of this is that everyone sort of nervously sort of holds back, in effect. No one's prepared to make that full commitment to the other party, because they want to have this, or one side at least wants to have the option of exiting at any minute. Now, this in turn has other effects. For example, if these terms are what the client wants, I will say, well, you have to pay me up front. If you're not prepared to pay me up front, then the risk and exposure I have in doing business with you is greater than the value of the contract. So I'm not interested, or I'm again simplifying a bit. I and my colleagues are not interested. Now they may see that as a tantamount to impertinence, but we're a $500 billion company, and you're nothing but a little company, and like you do what the fuck we tell you, motherfucker. There's a bit of that, and quite a bit of bullying goes on. Organisations have signs everywhere saying they don't tolerate bullying, are usually the worst for actually bullying. But I've been around too long, and I don't take that crap. But the end result is a diminishing amount of business and commercial trust. And I find now, when I offer a contract to people, saying, well, look, here's, sign here, make any changes you want, but the end result is the same, that we're obliged to each other for the agreed term, or the agreed volume of widgets, or the agreed volume of services, or whatever it might be, then they won't do it. They're very reluctant to do it, and yet expect the other side, expect us in this instance, or me in this instance, to be fully obligated to them. And people just aren't doing that. And so that's causing a lot of trust. Now, in terms of the loss of trust, rather, in terms of the Chinese and the Asians, or Africans, or any other racial group that's being brought into the West in vast numbers. Even ones that are born here, they still have the old country, the racial origin attitudes to business. So, and again, in the case of the Indians, that they're the subcontinent folks, outwitting other people is how you make money. And there's one guy from actually I think this guy was Arabic, but he fancied himself as a hot shit negotiator, which he wasn't. He was just some flunky bum, but he fancied himself as hot shit, and he reckons he could get people to think they were getting half the cake, this is his words, half the cake, when in reality they're only getting a quarter of the cake. And again, he fancied himself as particularly high powered in that regard. But watching him in action, and just for a short time, he relied completely on bluff and duplicity and treachery and underhanded methods to achieve that, which isn't going to gain him anything. It's not going to, or he would particularly pick soft, easy targets that he could intimidate into taking a very one-sided deal, but then would complain that they wouldn't do business with him again and things like that. So this idea of fair and reasonable, and we can both make money out of this, which requires a certain amount of faith, that's almost completely absent in the subcontinent diasporas or Chinese diaspora. And just an example, not that long ago, a pretty substantial Chinese outfit came to us for some services, and this is high tech stuff, some services, and we were more than happy to oblige. We saw it as quite straightforward. Right? Tell us what you want, we'll quote you, and then let's get on with it. More or less, that was it. But they wanted to go through an elaborate meetings and discussions, and there was a very one-sided contract that they produced, and the most onerous non-disclosure agreement I think I've ever seen in my life, and implications that if we strayed from the path they wanted us on, that unpleasant people would come knocking on the door. That wasn't said directly, but there was definitely an implication of that. And their office, their head office here or the regional office here in Sydney, there was quite a few people working there, and they're all Chinese, and there wasn't one non-Chinese person and in the whole place, and they didn't know, and I didn't say that I spoke. I was getting rustier now, but I spoke quite passable Mandarin, and so I could understand a reasonable amount of what they were saying. And they didn't know that, but they spoke Mandarin all the time, and then spoke in some rather basic English to me when they wanted to make a point. But the thing is, their view was that it wasn't a business transaction. It was something more than that, or different from that. It was a cultural transaction, and the ghost eyes, the Quilo, that's what the Chinese call the Anglos, the ghost eyes were out to screw them, and would screw them if they could. So only the tightest controls over the white boys would work. Anything outside of that was unthinkable to them, and the belief that they had this intrinsic belief that they would come off second best or worst if they didn't put this level of control in, which struck me as odd, given the nature of the transaction provided almost no latitude for them being screwed, but they had this predisposition of zero trust. And now once you start treating people with zero trust, they tend to reciprocate. So if you don't trust me at all, then why the fuck should I trust you? That type of thing. And so it breeds a level of distrust that didn't exist in the first place. So we went in thinking, okay, it was a fairly simple, it was fairly straightforward. Technically, it was complex, but in terms of the work, it's straightforward. Well, show us what you want. can we have a look at these examples that you've been talking about, and let's get on with it. When do you want it by? Okay, what's the price? Now, even with the price, it costs a certain amount of money for us to produce that type of work. So, but they perceived everything was negotiation, that we had zero costs to bear, and everything was by negotiation. And only when they were absolutely sure that they'd won. But this gives away an insecurity about the business transaction, but also it gives away their amateurism. Once you get people who behave like that, you're dealing with amateurs, and that's always a concern. Now, with amateurs, my point is, well, look, you don't know what I don't phrase it like this. You don't know what you're doing, so you might as well let us guide you. That's what you're paying for, our expertise. If you want to get an independent consultant, you go ahead and do that. But we need to get on with this work and treat it as a body of work with a cost that has to be delivered in this time frame. We agree on that, then get on with it. Oh, no, white boy, you try tricks. You try to trick us. We know you trick. And they go down that path, which of course is counterproductive to the thing. So look, just looking at that, the groups that are coming in, they all have this paranoid fear of which is being screwed, but not as in like they fear being screwed. They fear not being as good as the white boy. That's really it. And so as a result, they try and limit their business to doing business with idiots, or alternatively, try and have very one-sided agreements, which, as they see, levels the playing field. So for every dollar, if we take 99 cents and you have 1 cent, then we know that we've won. We know that we're in front, and only then will we calm down enough to do business with you. But of course, that doesn't work in the real world. But that's my wider views and a wider discussion about this. But business trust has effectively, I don't think it's 100% gone, but it's close to it. And unless I'm dealing with someone approximately my own age and expertise and experience and knowledge, I either don't have faith in the transaction or don't have faith in their ability to evaluate it and stay with it. You've been with TASIS today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.